Lovely. Okay, so it's 4:30 on the last day of Bio 2012 Live. I'm Lewis Knight, and welcome. I'm a program manager with Bio Regional, but also with the Oxfordshire Green Tech Network. Absolutely delighted to be part of Bio 2012. What an amazing success it's been, with amazing speakers and some great discussion, really showing that in this new way of working, we can still have fantastic interactivity and networking between businesses. Oxfordshire Green Tech has had 3 presentations over the 3 days, with many more of our members speaking as well. And today you'll be hearing from Steve Neal, who is the head of audit for Shaw Gibbs, one of our founder members. I'm just going to give a really quick introduction to Oxfordshire Green Tech. We're a business network looking to grow the size, scale and reach of the low carbon and clean economy across Oxfordshire. And Shaw Gibbs are one of our founder members, and it is brilliant that they are supporting this growing network. We launched back in February 2019 at the Side Business School with close to 300 attendees, and our membership is now over 100. Green Tech has been developed in partnership between Bio Regional, Cornwall District Council and also Cambridge Clean Tech, which is a well-established network at the other end of the Oxford-Cambridge knowledge arc. Do note that by joining Oxfordshire Green Tech, you also become an associate member of Cambridge Clean Tech as well, so lots of benefits. And our core focus is really to develop a green ecosystem of low-carbon businesses, but also all those organisations that need to surround a economic sector team. So our members include engineering companies. We even have estate agents, lawyers, architects, and even planet positive printers. During this very uncertain time, we are offering free membership to all our existing members, but also to all new members. This does end at the end of June, so if you are interested, then please do get in touch with us via our website or via our social media. And now on to the presentation today with Steve Neal from Shaw Gibbs. So UK businesses driving innovation and development can claim grants through various bodies such as Innovate UK, Horizon 2020, and now the newly emerging Coronavirus Future Fund. So today Steve is going to cover the practical steps in getting your claim and the reporting requirements right. Steve is an audit specialist with over 25 years of experience. He leads the audit team at the top 100 accountancy practice Shaw Gibbs. This includes a dedicated grant audit team, which Malik Salim is part of. Malik will be on hand during this presentation to assist with any Q&A at the end. So without further ado, Steve, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to get out of there, and I am going to hand over to you, Steve. I'm going to turn off my webcam just so it gives your screen a larger presence.
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. We've really appreciated being able to join with Oxfordshire Green Tech actually, and appreciated the support they provided to us as we've begun our green journey. So yeah, thank you to Lewis for that intro. So this is about getting your grant claim right, and what we're going to be covering today are the following things. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the sorts of grants that we're talking about, look at the advantages and disadvantages of that grant funding, talking you briefly through the application process, looking at your audit obligations for those grants, and then what you need to do in terms of record keeping, and just a little bit of a chat about what you can't claim for. And hopefully there'll be time at the end for some Q&A if there is any questions. So, a bit of an overview. There are multiple government-backed grants which are available, both from the EU and the UK. And in the main, the funding bodies that we deal with tend to be Innovate UK and Horizon 2020. But we also deal with grants from regional development agencies, such as the Welsh Development Agency, for example. Most of the information in this presentation relates to Innovate UK unless I say otherwise, as this is a funding body for whom we most regularly carry out grant audits. We're talking here about grants. They're not loans, they are grants. They're a sum of money given to an individual or a business for a specific project or purpose, and they usually cover part or all of a project. Grants may be linked to any business activity or a particular business activity, or they may be to do with employment creation or some specific industry sector. Some grants are linked to geographic areas, such as those areas in need of economic regeneration. So areas of funding for grants that we've dealt with have included regeneration areas, low carbon projects, civil aerospace research, digital healthcare technologies, biomedical sciences, and enhancing agriculture productivity. These R&D projects tend to need to be seeking to resolve a technical uncertainty by undertaking some kind of usually risky or innovative research and development. R&D grants are often awarded to projects often considered too risky for outside private sector investment. So the proposed R&D projects and costs must usually be realistic with a clear commercial opportunity, and they should have the aim of creating new or exploiting significant growth within their market. So what about the pros and cons then of the grant process? Well, firstly, you're getting money for doing some work. So it gives you an opportunity to drive corporate innovation and develop products that without that funding you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. It is a grant and not a loan. You don't have to pay the money back, although we will come on to some potential drawbacks later on. One of the things about these grants is that they can be difficult to obtain in the first instance, but once you've got a track record, they snowball. You get used to making grant applications, and the grant providers get used to you and trust you. And so once you've got one grant, you can get many others. And these grants can be sizable. They can be significant sums of money. I'll talk later about grants in excess of £1 or £2 million. They don't all have to be small. Some of them are large, can make a significant difference to the work that you do. And there's plenty of information in the public domain to help you to choose the right funding body, to make the right application, to make sure that the grant that you want to apply for matches the type of work that you're doing. But it isn't all easy. There are some disadvantages, things that you need to consider. These grants are competitive. Competition can be fierce for some of these grants. There's usually only a handful of grants given for every number, or 20, 30, 40, whatever it is, applications. It is a competitive process, and you need to bear that in mind. You do need to make sure that you adhere to the grant claim restrictions, that you comply with the terms of the grant that are awarded. Failure to adhere to these grants could result in some kind of clawback of the money that has been paid to you. Another issue, not necessarily a particularly difficult one, is repeat applications. You might be undertaking a project which has a number of phases, and the likelihood is that once you've completed one phase, you will need to reapply almost from scratch to get the next tranche of funding. But of course, having done the process once, you're going to be well prepared to do that again. The grant application process can be time consuming. I've indicated that it's good to do the research to make sure that you're matching the right type of grant body with the work that you're doing. You need to make sure you understand what that funding body is looking for and what they're going to expect to see in an application. It isn't necessarily a quick process to apply. And it is also likely that you won't always be able to get all of the money you want for your project. You'll need to either match some of the funding yourself or obtain that funding from other sources if you are allowed to have multiple funding for a particular project. Not all grant providers will allow multiple funding. So those are the sort of things that need to be checked out as part of your process. So what does the application process look like? Well, I've already said it can be time-consuming and a resource-intensive process. You need to make sure that you've got a very strong case for your innovation, both from a technical and a commercial perspective, to give the best chance for your application to be successful. You must make sure that your application is within the scope of the grant. For example, some grants are sector-specific. Other grants are available only for certain collaborative projects. So you do need to be prepared for what you're applying for. Are you applying for the right sort of grant? And do that research thoroughly. Many of these grants are completed online, and you need to make sure that your application is fully completed before you submit. You only get a number of opportunities to apply for some of these grants. So if you get it wrong, the second time you probably get another chance, but the third time, if you get it wrong, you probably won't be allowed to apply again. So again, that research up front is really important as you go through an online process, an online application process. Your application is much more likely to be successful if it thoroughly and clearly articulates the business opportunity for the project. It talks about the project's resulting products, processes, or services that will have a growth impact for your business or lead to significant return on investment or make a difference in your community, whether it be a local community, the scientific community. What's going to make a difference? What is it you're doing that will make a difference? Why is it that your business should get this grant as opposed to some other competitor? You need to explain what makes your business in a good position to succeed with this innovation. It's also good for your application to demonstrate that you have a clear understanding of your target market, including how you're going to compete with competing projects, and that you've got a good concept for how to commercialize that product. How are you going to get it to market? So show why your proposed product or service produces a step change. You know, what's the impact going to be? How is it going to change society? How is it going to change the particular area that you're working in? So as I said, there's a lot of research needed to get these answers right, to give yourself the maximum chance of winning the money that you're applying for. So now you've got the money, what are your audit obligations? Well, it does vary, and it will vary between the different grant awarding bodies, and it will vary depending on the size of the grant that you've been awarded. Usually, if there is a grant audit requirement, you'll be required to submit a claim with an audit within a certain number of days of the end of your first grant period. It's typically 30 days for Innovate UK grant, typically 60 days for Horizon 2020, but it does vary. It certainly varies between other grant bodies as well. So you need to be prepared and ready to go with your regular reporting. The audit needs to be carried out usually by a registered auditor. And it may be that if you have a financial auditor, they don't have the experience to do the grant. Or if you're not audited, then it's possible that your accountant isn't a registered auditor and you need to find somebody else to do that work for you. I'm not here to sell Shaw Gibbs necessarily, but just so you know, Shaw Gibbs does about 50 of these grant audits a year. So we're very well able to meet the demands and know what's required for a grant audit. Malik does a lot of these audits. The audit fees will depend on the size and the nature of the project, and obviously how often those audits have to be done. It is important that you understand how regularly the audits need to be done, how regularly you need to submit a claim to your grant body. So remember to check the offer letter and the funding agreement for the fine print, because there will be some, undoubtedly. Just to give you an indication, this is a typical Innovate UK grant period. So if your grant is under £25,000, then it's likely that you won't need to have a formal audit at all. You'll just need to make a statement of income and expenditure. If your grant is between £25,000 and £100,000, you probably only need to submit a grant when you submit your last claim for that money. If your grant is between £100,000 and £500,000, then you probably need to audit for the first and last claim submissions. But if your grant is between £500,000 and £2 million, then you're likely to need to have an audit with the first claim, the last claim, and each anniversary of your project start date. And for those grants which are more than 2 million, we don't see that many of those, you do need to submit a grant audit with each of your grant claims. So how do you do that? Well, like all businesses, you must maintain good records, and you need to maintain these records because you might be needing to make quarterly grant audits if that's the requirement that's given to you. So you must keep evidence of all costs which are allocated to your project. So invoices need to be clearly allocated to the project so that the auditor can see what's been done, and also so that internally you can allocate those costs to your project budget so you can monitor the progress of your project costing. You need to isolate your payroll costs. You will know what your total payroll costs are, of course, but do you know what your payroll costs are relating to your specific R&D project? So, for example, do you know or do you have a timesheet system that can allocate costs to each project? That's really important so you can see the payroll costs that you're going to make a claim for. Very often it's the payroll costs which form the bulk of these claims and the bulk of the audit work involved, which is why you must make sure your employment contracts are all kept. You should do that anyway, of course, but they need to be available for your grant claim auditor to see, to verify that the costs that you're claiming relate to bona fide employees. You might have expenses that form part of your costs that aren't levied to you by invoice. Employees might need to travel between sites, for example. So those expenses claims need to be verifiable and kept and clearly allocated to your project. There's quite a lot of administration involved here to make sure that these project costs are kept up to date, which is why I mentioned the project budget here. You need to know what your budget is and how you're doing against your milestones in terms of meeting those budgets. Make sure you've always got your tendering documents to hand, your grant claim application, so you can see what you said, to see what you're measuring against. And I know it goes without saying, but you must keep the bank statements because the auditor needs to see those to check whether there's been any other funding received against a project, particularly if the funding body says you may not receive additional funding. So what you can't claim for. Just a word of warning here. If you're claiming research and development tax credits, you will normally not be able to claim R&D tax relief if you've received a grant against a project. If a project's been partially funded, you can probably claim R&D tax relief for the remainder of the grant project that wasn't funded. But you can't use both because they're both state funding, so you can't double count it. You can't claim the same costs twice either. That's what we in the trade call fraud. So just make sure that you're not double counting anything. Some funding bodies do allow the cost of the audit to be claimed, others don't. So again, you need to check the fine print of your funding allocation, your funding body. And you can't claim for unforeseen costs. When you submit your claim, you normally have to state what the costs are that you will be claiming for. So even if you've got a legitimate cost, if it falls outside of your original claim, you probably can't claim for it. So it's really important to get your costing right at the start of that grant claim process. So in summary, please fully research the project scope before you start to make your application process. Get that application process right. And there are specialist people, specialist companies that can help you get that application in and get it right, which is especially important perhaps for your first claim, if it's a complicated claim. Do consider that advice to get your claim right and give yourself the best chance of winning those funds. Understand the timeframes that you're working towards. You'll be setting out milestones perhaps in your grant application. You need to keep to those timeframes, keep to the submission deadlines for making those regular reports to your grant funding body. Understand when an audit is and isn't required, and keep your records in order. And as I said, just be mindful of what you may not be able to claim. There's a few links here just to help you. There's our own firm, Shaw Gibbs. Innovate UK, one of the most prolific funders we see in terms of the grants that we're auditing. Horizon 2020, we've mentioned those a few times in terms of some European grants. And I've put TBAT on here because they're one of the businesses that we're aware of and have worked with that help companies to get their grant claims correct in the first place to maximise your application chances.